Charles here. Um, Somebody sent this in and asked me to do a quick sort of video of how to answer these T-account questions. Um, in essence, when they ask what is the reserve requirement here, we know they have 100,000 in demand deposits. They have 10,000 in required reserves. The understanding here is that $10,000 is 10% of 100,000. So our reserve requirement must have been 10%. In that, if somebody deposits $100,000 into the bank, the government or the Fed not the government, the Fed requires that they keep 10% of it in required reserves. All right. Assume that Louis withdraws 5,000 in cash from his checking account at Mi Tierra Bank. So, if he takes out $5,000, immediately that money's got to be paid out to Louis, and that money can only come from excess reserves. So excess reserves drops down to zero. He also took $5,000 out, so we don't owe it to him any. The bank doesn't, Mi Tierra Bank does not owe it to him anymore. It's not a liability. So this 100,000 will drop down to 95,000. But now that this has dropped down to 95,000, we don't need the whole 10,000 in required reserves. Because remember, we only need 10% of whatever's in demand deposits and required reserves. So this would drop down to 9,500. Understand that $500 didn't just disappear. Now it's not needed in required reserves, so that extra $500 would flow into excess reserves. So I think we're set up now. Louis came in, withdrawed $5,000. Excess reserves went to zero. Demand deposits went to 95,000. We only need 10% of that 95,000 in required reserves, so that was 9,500. That extra $500 that wasn't needed in required reserves flowed into excess reserves. And now could be loaned out if the bank needed it to be. Now let's read them. By how much will Mi Tierra's bank's reserves change based on Louise's withdrawal? This is a bit of a trick question. People tend to have a lot of problems with this. Just understand that when they use the word reserves, College Board's being a little tricky here. Reserves not only, I spelled that right, doesn't matter, is about required, but it also is about excess reserves. So we had 10,000 in required, and we had 5,000 in excess. That was a total of 15,000. Our change, obviously, is that excess went down to 5, this went down to 95. Our change is $5,000. Can we see that? That we had now we have required reserves of 95 and 5, which gives us 10. We have lost $5,000. This should be straightforward, but you'd be surprised at how many people that question seems to confuse. What is the initial effect of the withdrawal on the M1 measure of the money supply? Please explain. This is a stock question. This question gets asked a lot, and we just need to know that we have an answer for this ready in our brains. So the idea is that what happens to the immediate, what is the initial effect of this withdrawal on the M1 measure of money? Well, you need to know that M1 is all coins, cash, and checkable deposits. Remember, checkable deposits is also the same thing as demand deposits. Lots of times the College Board likes to use both of those, checkable deposits and demand deposits. So if this is M1 and I took money out of the bank, so the money went from the bank and I turned it into cash. In the bank, it was a checkable or a demand deposit. So I took it out of checkable deposits and I made it into cash. Did M1 change at all? All I'm really doing, the way we would explain this, is M1 did not change at all. We would say, what is the initial effect? We would say there's no change in M1 as we moved money into different categories inside of M1. Does this make sense? I hope it does. The idea is that I'm just moving money from my bank account and I'm putting it in my pocket. Both of those are considered part of M1. So we just moved money from one different section of M1 to the other. There was no change in M1. I hope that's clear. 3, as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet? We've already done this. It is now $500. All right. Assume the next day John withdraws from Meteor Bank an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves. Assuming no loans are called in, how can Meteor cover its required reserves? There's two ways we're going to talk about this. One is that the federal funds rate. What is the federal funds rate? This is what we call bank to bank loans. So the idea here is that this bank, Meteor, could go to another bank and it could obviously just borrow from another bank. The other thing we could talk about is the discount rate. And the discount rate is what we call Fed to bank loans. This bank loans. So you could have borrowed from another bank. You could have borrowed from the Fed. Either one of these would have been perfectly good answers. Either one would have been perfectly good answers to get the points from the College Board. I like both of these. I think you need to know both. You do need to know both of these, so just know them. Bank-to-bank loans is the federal funds rate, discount rate, just an interest rate that's charged. But you could have just wrote probably bank or Fed, and you would have been golden on that. All right. Thanks, guys. Keep working hard. Be safe.